Hello everyone, I'm your host Daniel Litwin, the voice of B2B, and you're watching a live Datascan Retail Roundtable. Thank you so much for joining us. We're looking forward to bringing you Datascan's first live panel discussion, where we're bringing a group of thought leaders on to explore pressing trends, tech, methodologies, and opportunities in the broader retail industry. This won't be the only one of these we do, but stick around for the whole show as we get into some heated debates, get some hot takes, some cold takes potentially. We'll play some quick thinking games, might even have a lightning round on top of all this. We've got lots on our live roundtable. So thank you again for joining us, and make sure you're heading to our website, datascan.com. for more information on the various topics we'll break down today, and of course for some more Datascan content. So today's show is called To Count or Not to Count, where we'll explore the impact of inventory accuracy on retail sales and retail loss. After a year of retail's trends shifting dramatically or accelerating rapidly, the omni-channel strain on the retail supply chain continues to manifest in very acute ways. So with our discussion, what we're wanting to do is better understand how retail is actively still changing, why inventory accuracy matters in today's industry, and what pressures are making it tough to master that inventory management. Obviously, we'll offer some solutions and strategies as well. So again, head to our site, datascan.com, and during the conversation today, leave some comments, and we might answer some of your questions mid-broadcast. So I'm super pleased to welcome our three guests for today. We're joined by Adrian Beck, an emeritus professor at the University of Leicester. We're also joined by Mr. Adrian Thomas, president and CEO of Datascan. And we're joined by David Erasmus, director for the EMEA region for Datascan. Welcome to our two Adrians and our one Dave. It's great to have you all on, and pleasure getting to chat with you today. Real quick, our sort of a highlight guest today is Mr. Adrian Beck. Adrian, give us your quick elevator pitch on your background and some of the other organizations that you're a part of in the retail industry.
Sure, Daniel. Hi, nice to see everybody. Yeah, I spent about the last 30 years carrying out a whole range of different research projects around retail loss prevention, trying to help the industry to become more agile and fleet of foot in trying to deal with some of these big issues that they've struggled with over very many years. So I've worked with retailers around the world. I work with the ECR Retail Loss Group as their academic advisor, and try and really push forward new thinking and new ideas in this realm.
Fantastic. Well, we're really pleased to have you on, Professor Beck. And for Adrian Thomas and Dave Erasmus, always a pleasure getting to chat. Adrian, we've had some great conversations. I'm looking forward to bringing some of those to Datascan's Roundtable. So let's go ahead and kick off our show. We've got about 30 to 40 minutes of content for you all today, and we're going to start off with a lightning round to get the blood pumping early. So this lightning round of questions we like to call for better or for worse. So with our first segment, what we're wanting to do is get some early hot takes on last year's changes within retail. Last year and a half of retail's changes. Everything from brick and mortar operations to e-commerce to supply chains and fulfillment centers. All existing trends were accelerated across the board due to the pandemic. So today what we're asking is, were these changes or accelerations over the last year and a half for better or for worse? Where did they leave the industry, and are we in a better place because of them? How did the industry respond? So we're going to be getting those answers here in a lightning round. The gist is simple. What I'll do is pose a similarly structured question to each of you individually. The question will go like this: did blank insert thing give retailers more inventory management opportunities or challenges for going into 2021? So each of you will have a different thing to comment on. You'll then have 15 seconds to give your response. Once you're done, we'll toss it over to another guest to either agree or disagree, also with 15 seconds on the clock for a little rebuttal for just some of that debate drama. So we will do this 3 times so everyone has a chance to play each role. Let's go ahead and jump in. We're going to start with Adrian Beck. So my first question for you, Adrian, is did more consumer choice over various e-commerce platforms give retailers more inventory management opportunities or challenges for going into 2021? Again, more consumer choice over e-commerce platforms. 15 seconds on the clock. What do you think?
Well, Dan, it's been a bit of a curate's egg, really, because on the one part, retailers were grateful for whatever sales they could get through e-commerce because most of bricks and mortar was closed down in lots of countries. But I think on the downside, what e-commerce does is it shines a very harsh spotlight on retailers' inventories. And what we've seen is that e-commerce shoppers are not very forgiving when it comes to having inaccurate inventory in terms of inventory accuracy. And so, I think it's been a tough time for retailers to make sure they can deliver their e-commerce promises.
And we're going to get a little more than 15 seconds to expand on that here in a little bit, but thank you for that. Let's pitch it over to Adrian Thomas. Do you agree or disagree there with Mr. Beck? 15 seconds on the clock.
No, I agree. I think that the sort of proliferation of e-commerce channels are just going to make things more difficult for retailers. They're going to have to manage more fulfillment, more replenishment, and more issues around supply chain that through those different supply chain channels that they've not had before.
Agreed. All right, let's switch it over to another thing here to fill with. We'll transition over to Adrian Thomas. You'll start us off here. Did self-checkout, just sort of in general and in its various forms, did self-checkout give retailers more inventory management opportunities or challenges for going into 2021? 15 seconds, Adrian Thomas, go.
I think obviously self-checkout has been very prevalent in the grocery section. So for those grocers that have used self-checkout before, I don't think it's going to give them any greater challenges around inventory management. It's all about loss prevention. I think for those retailers that are going to look at self-checkout in non-grocery, it absolutely will give them challenges around both loss prevention and inventory management going forward.
Dave Erasmus, let's pitch it over to you. 15 seconds on the clock. Do you agree or disagree with Adrian's comments there? Follow us up.
Yeah, I totally agree in terms of the grocery sector being a lot more mature in terms of the self-checkout. Having said that, I think a lot more consumers gravitated towards that. And self-checkout doesn't mean that there's no interaction from a customer perspective or from a retailer perspective. They still have to have staff on hand to monitor those transactions. So we have seen an uptick in the number of fraud and loss happening at self-checkout.
All right, last one that I want to pitch y'all's way. This will go back to you, Dave, to start, is mass online order fulfillment. And just for a little clarity there, basically, we saw over the last year and a half, retailers have to either go completely to online orders or create a more robust hybrid omni-channel sales approach. And that pushed a lot of retailers to have to develop their fulfillment operations for online orders en masse and at scale. So, Dave, question for you is, did mass online order fulfillment give retailers more inventory management opportunities or challenges going into 2021? 15 seconds, kick us off.
I think, Daniel, it really depends on the capabilities that were developed prior to the pandemic. Obviously, those that had already built those capabilities flourished, and those that didn't floundered and are trying to develop those capabilities, a bit like changing a wheel on a moving vehicle at the moment, unfortunately. So I suspect that those companies are faced with extreme challenges.
Changing a wheel on a moving vehicle. I like that one. I'm adding that to my personal repertoire of metaphors there. I love it. Adrian Beck, let's pitch it over to you now. Follow us up there. What do you think? Do you agree or disagree with Dave's assessment?
Well, I think, what really struck me around this is that there's a big elephant in the room when it comes to e-commerce, and that's the issue of returns. And I think this is what a lot of retailers are now finding as they've plunged into this area, is that it's not as easy as they thought it was for those who haven't been doing it for a fair while. And what happens is that you get a lot of this stuff back. And I think that's one of the great challenges that they have, is actually managing that return flow of products that customers thought they wanted, but then they actually turn around and say they don't want it.
And that does it for our lightning round. Thank you to the three of you for some quick answers. Now what we're going to do is open it up on those same topics just a little bit before we move on. But our next main section here is something I'd like to call putting the why in inventory management. So what we're doing is just digging a little deeper into retail sales, retail loss, asking the meatier questions of our discussion, just to understand how this last year of changes has put a focus on inventory management and the ways it has grown in scope for most retailers. So again, I want to start with an open discussion on any of these core topics we just laid out during our lightning round that you think need a little more discussion. So I'll pose this open question and sort of let y'all take it where you think the conversation should go. But where should retailers be focusing their energy, their resources, and responses when worrying about or strategizing around these various changes? And again, those would be growth of e-commerce and how this is enabling more immediate and responsive consumer choice, or just more options for the consumer. This could be new strategies for brick and mortar stores, becoming both shops and fulfillment centers all at once and at scale. Would also love to hear your thoughts on contactless checkout, for example, and intersecting with existing trends in self-checkout and reducing consumer friction. There's a lot to chat on, but basically, over those last topics we broke down, anything else of note that we should expand on?
Can I kick off, John, if I may?
Please do, yeah.
What struck me, I just finished a piece of research around the use of radio frequency identification technologies, and what really struck me around that was how those who are really investing in that technology now were doing it for a fair part because they wanted to have their bricks and mortar stores now become omni-channel fulfillment centers. And the reason they were investing in RFID in particular was because they just didn't trust the accuracy of the inventory in those stores. And I think what this has really shone a light on here is that when you move to online and you begin to have a larger proportion of your sales being delivered through online, that the importance of accuracy becomes ever more important, I think, because I think you can get away with having relatively inaccurate inventory in a retail store because that's what people got used to. But online, I think the demand is different, and I think people are much more unaccepting of orders not being fulfilled because you haven't got a good control of your inventory in your retail organization. So I think this is really e-commerce shines, I think, a really bright light, I think, on why inventory accuracy matters even more these days.
And I can pick up on that, I think, too, Adrian. I think a lot of it is obviously driven by the consumer behavior that is accelerated, or the pace of change in consumer behavior of adapting your own buying patterns to e-commerce opportunities. And now the expectation is that we all need an instant response. We all need an instant time when the products that we want can be available and where they can be available from. And I think that we're also seeing that people want a broad variety when they're shopping online. So we're not just going and buying one item. We're maybe buying 4 items. And to Adrian's earlier point, we may only keep one ultimately and return 3. So there is that whole inventory management piece around having the original inventory available for sale and distribution, very quickly, and then there is the replenishment of those and balancing that against the returns that come back in. So if the retailer doesn't get it right, they can find that they're overstocked in a large number of items if they don't manage those 2 particular things correctly.
Yeah, I think the other thing that strikes me is as you move into this world of, having all your old bricks and mortar stores as fulfillment centers, is that, traditionally you'd have a very piecemeal approach, wouldn't you, to understanding where your inventory was. You'd say, well, this store's got this amount and this one's got some stock, but we're not quite sure what it is. And when you move to doing that, then you have to have a much more enterprise-wide view, don't you, of your inventory, because if you're going to say, well, I'm going to get store X to fulfill that order, you need to be pretty confident that it's got the products that customer wants, and therefore having that broader view of where all the inventory is in a retail organization pretty much in real time has become, I think, a real priority and a challenge for retail businesses.
Expand on that for us a little bit, because we've seen that manifest for smaller stores and for your largest national big box chains where the brick and mortar footprint is no longer shop specific, but it really is a large network of order fulfillment where you need to not only have inventory in-house for the consumer that wants to step in the front doors, and also need to be able to fulfill orders for that now increasing and ever increasing population of online shoppers. How have you seen this challenge manifest in very acute ways for the retail professional? And feel free to also offer some strategies or solutions around managing that enterprise view of inventory management.
Yeah. I mean, I think what I've seen a lot of retailers really struggle with this because in theory it's a great idea, isn't it? Because if you begin to use your retail stores as fulfillment centers, then you get a better turn of product. Typically in a departmental store, you may turn a product maybe twice a year, maybe 3 times a year at most in a bricks and mortar scenario. And that's a pretty poor return on your investment for that product. Whereas if you say, well, let's use them to fulfill orders, then we can actually increase the churn and turn of our product, which should actually make for more financial sense. But, and it is a big but, is you've got to be pretty sure that stock is available when you're saying to that store, we want you to ship this because we're promising this customer they're going to get it tomorrow. And that's our promise. And we know that if we don't deliver on that promise, customers are increasingly very fickle beings and they will quickly shift because, as you said earlier, their choice has increased dramatically. If retailer A hasn't got it, you know what? I've got retailer B, C, and D queuing up to give me the same product. And so I've got to deliver. And therefore, that's why I think this issue of inventory accuracy has become so super critical, because it underpins your credibility as an organization to deliver your promise that you can provide that consumer with what they want and when they want it.
Absolutely. Dave, would love to hear your thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, Daniel, developing these capabilities is not something that is achieved immediately overnight. It requires a lot of investment, a lot of thinking about how you're going to fulfill, where your stores are located. What we're finding is, what I believe is happening is a lot more retailers are reassessing their store portfolios, looking at where they're located in relation to their DCs. And they're also doing a lot of research in what does a store of the future look like? How do I incorporate the omni-channel sales cycle and processes into my store? There's a heck of a lot of education and process change that goes along with that. And again, coming back to that analogy of changing the wheel of a moving car, there's all of these things that need to come together to make this all work. Inventory record accuracy is, I believe, where we need to be focusing as a quicker win to real-time visibility, because getting real-time visibility will take some time and investment in terms of systems and technology. But inventory record accuracy is something that can be a focus. RFID certainly plays a role within that, but it's certainly not the only sort of approach to tweak and to move the needle in terms of inventory record accuracy. But it does require focus, a strategic focus to hone in on that and look to how you can improve that.
Yeah, I'd like to just maybe pick up on one additional item on this one, and that is the sort of cost component that retailers have within their delivery channels. And if you're going to use a store as a fulfillment center, there's a couple of ways you can do it. You can do it with a ship from store, and obviously there is a picking requirement at that point, and then there is a shipping requirement at that point, and there may be a returns receipt requirement as well when it comes back. We're also seeing, and this started pre-COVID, the sort of acceleration of click and collect or buy online, pick up in store. And I think that's where obviously you're combining the e-commerce purchase engine with a physical pick up and delivery engine, and the attraction potentially for the retailer there is you're physically going to get your buyer into the store, at which point they're picking up something that they've already ordered. The likelihood is that they're going to spend more money while they're in the store. So I think there is a choice that the retailer can make to determine, are we just going to be fulfilling from the store, or are we going to go to click and collect or buy online, pick up in store, and drive our foot traffic through the store to drive additional sales?
I'd like to intersect this with retail loss now, more specifically. So if you could take sort of where our conversation is at and also give us some context on how you see today's retail sales environment and subsequent inventory management needs creating new challenges around retail loss. Intersect those dots for us.
Yeah, you know, I think one of the big issues with retail loss is that actually, for the most part, retailers have absolutely no idea where, when, or how the loss occurred. And the reason for that is that they count their stock so infrequently. And so their typical loss calculation is, you know, what stock did we think we have? We count it, and there's some stock missing. They go, well, that loss then is the difference between what we thought we had and what is actually in the stores. And so that ends up being their loss number. But it's an unknown loss number because you've no idea when it went missing, where it went missing, or who took it in the period between the last time you counted. And so you end up with this very grey number, this very grey area of loss where you try and fathom out what caused that loss and how you hopefully can then try and prevent it. And so, you know, one of the great challenges around things like e-commerce and, you know, we mentioned earlier self-checkout is that they are tremendous generators of unknown loss. You know, particularly it's something like self-checkout, where if you've got a consumer who decides not to scan an item for whatever reason, and they leave the store without scanning that item, the retailer will not know that that item is missing until they get round to counting all their stock again, which could be up to 12 months' time. And so you end up with the stock file being corrupted every time that somebody takes a product out of a shop without telling the retailer that they've done it. And so thieves are terrible at this. They're very poor at telling retailers to update their inventory when they steal things. And so that generates a huge amount of error in the inventory file because the retailer doesn't know it's gone missing. And so that's why you end up with a lot of out of stocks, is because the retailer doesn't know the stock's gone missing. So retail loss is a really important element for the retail organizations to try and get their heads around and to understand, because it eventually impacts upon their capacity and capability to sell product to the consumer.
Adrian, am I correct in saying, and I think I saw this stat sometime last year, that inventory accuracy degrades at a rate of approximately 3% per month, you know, after you complete a count? Is that still valid, do you think?
Absolutely, yeah. You know, and it just builds over time. And so, you know, if you are, you know, some of the old style retailers where they will count their stock once a year, you can imagine that the rate that degrades over time. You know, perhaps we shouldn't be surprised when we look back now and we say, well, the average, inventory accuracy in a retail store was about 60%. You know, 40% inaccuracy across the range, and it's perfectly understandable when you have this degradation over time because it's not being corrected through things like counting the stock again on a routine basis. So, you know, and then the fruition of that is, you know, the problem you have is, you know, I'm a consumer, I want that product. You're saying that product is available online, so I'm going to click and say, please, can I have that? And then you go to the store and it's missing. It's not there. You're not able to deliver it, and that's a consequence of retail loss and the inability of organizations to accurately measure it in good time.
Yeah, just building on that, Adrian, if I had to put back on my asset protection or loss prevention hat again, I think for years we tried to find a compelling reason to encourage the business to count more frequently, so that from a loss prevention point of view, we could isolate the source and cause of loss. And I think this, this focus on inventory record accuracy has finally allowed the loss prevention community to come with a compelling argument to encourage the business to count more frequently. And we are in fact seeing a large majority of retailers now starting to introduce that more frequent, more targeted on their high loss or high volume or high turnover categories, and counting those more frequently in an endeavor to focus or to improve inventory record accuracy. But the loss prevention community love this because it gives them the data that they require to understand where loss is actually happening within the store and along the supply chain for that matter.
Yeah, I mean, it's, as Denning said, without data, you're just another person with an opinion. And, that's been the challenge for loss prevention is, why should we believe you? Because you never show us any data to show, what you're doing has any effect or it's as big a problem as you claim. And so getting that data stream then enables you to say we can begin to understand where it's happening, when it happened. But critically, that data, Dave, also then begins to enable you to evaluate the impact of anything you try to do to change it. Because obviously if you introduce an intervention, some sort of change, you want to know whether it works or not. I mean, the supplier will tell you it's the best thing since sliced bread, but whether it actually delivers is another question because you need the data to understand its impact. And that's where, retailers' reliance upon their inventory data to understand loss is so really very critical.
Absolutely, Adrian. We're also seeing a lot more retailers focusing on the supply chain, looking at the point of entry into the store, because I think for years we've tried to speed those processes up and have these blind receiving type of processes, and in effect transferring many inaccuracies into the store. And there seems to be a focus now again on looking at those processes and looking further down the supply chain to focus on what is causing inventory inaccuracy. So again, we see a huge focus on those various processes and extending back into the distribution center.
Yeah, that reminds me, David, it was a very famous study done back in 2001 now by a bunch of American academics where they went into a brand new store. It hadn't opened yet. It'd just been stocked by their retail supply chains. The store was in theory full, untouched by customers and staff. And they did an inventory count to see how accurate it was. And they found that there was a 25% error rate in the stock, even before the store had opened and allowed consumers in to do their worst. And so that really highlights, I think, your point around, stores can often inherit inventory inaccuracies from their supply chains. And therefore there needs to be, an emphasis upon making sure that what they're doing is not generating more problems for the retail stores as they move forwards.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely spot on with that, Adrian. Again, if I reflect back on my career in retail and opening up new stores, so often the project would slip for whatever reason, and getting inventory merchandised into the store is that last activity that is crunched into the final hours, and you've got inventory flying in all directions, and very often it's very difficult to keep a handle on it. So I've no doubt that most stores probably open up and start out with an inaccurate inventory record. So interesting study that was done there. Good that was confirmed.
Maybe I'd just add one more. I know, Daniel, we'd probably move on to another subject, but
I know you're good.
A couple of thoughts as well here is that there's two additional benefits that are really very real to having accurate inventory records. One is it drives more efficiency in your inventory management generally. So your whole supply chain becomes more efficient and your use of inventory becomes more efficient. So your costs go down. And secondly, it's also increasingly proven that accurate inventory in stores drives sales uplift. So there's a direct correlation between inventory accuracy and revenue to sales. And I think that wasn't fully understood, before COVID and before the changes that we've experienced as a result of that. It's now very real and and it's something that the C-level, executives within retailers are very concerned about.
I'm going to jump in here and focus in a little bit more specifically on out-of-stock challenges and on-shelf availability challenges. So obviously retailers are constantly seeking to reduce their high out-of-stock numbers and their low on-shelf availability interactions. Do you see those as different challenges that are affected by different market metrics, whether those are supply chain related or otherwise, or do you see those as intrinsically linked? Break down how you see those challenges manifesting, both high out of stock and low on shelf availability.
I think for me, the out of stock, if it's truly out of stock in the store, is driven by poor inventory management, and you have not driven a replenishment based on sales and accurate inventory levels. So to me, that's a broad-based inventory management issue. I think you need to look at understand why there are empty shelves, and maybe you have product in the back room, in the back stock, that you've not actually put out onto the floor stock. So that's an in-store process issue that may be driven by a systems challenge that the retailer may have.
Yeah, I mean, I've been trying to champion this thing called total retail loss, where I'm trying to get retail organizations to think more broadly about how loss affects their organizations, and it's made up of 42 categories of loss. We know the answer to everything is 42, and it is the same with retail loss. But one of those is lost profit from out of stocks, and I've been championing to say this should be an indicator for retailers to use, because if that product isn't on the shelf and I come in and I want to buy it, that is a lost sale, and you've lost profit because of that failure in not managing your inventories and your supply chains correctly. And I really think that when you begin to use that measure, it can begin to put a much broader and brighter spotlight on this issue. And when I did a little bit of research where I compared rates of lost profit from out of stocks with existing rates of loss from traditionally what's called shrinkage, unknown loss, and also from wastage in grocery, and lost profit from out of stocks was a higher number than shrinkage. Retailers were losing more through stock not being available for sale than they were from the way that they traditionally measure loss within their retail organization. So for me, it's a big deal, and I think we did an ECR study not long ago which showed that it can have a dramatic effect on retail profitability if you're not getting your inventory correct and you're getting out of stock on the shelf, because you hope that the consumer will switch and they'll choose a similar product. You hope it's got the same level of margin that the other one have, but there's a fair old chance that consumer is going to walk away and they're going to go to the store further down the road, or increasingly they're going to go home and order it online from somebody where they know they've got it. So, I think retailers have got to be super aware of the impact of out of stocks, and it can be difficult to measure. It's not an easy indicator. There are different ways in which we can understand out of stocks and on-shelf availability and what they mean, but I don't think in the past there's been enough emphasis on the impact that it has on retail profitability.
With that, customer choice in mind, I'm curious how you see customer expectations shaping inventory management investments moving forward. So with which investments do you think retailers are going to see the biggest win-win, both more efficient inventory and inventory management, as well as necessarily a more positive customer experience? Which investments do you see as the easiest ones to jump on and create that win-win for retailers, and why?
Well, I think, what you don't want to do is overpromise, do you, as a retailer? I mean, that's probably the worst place you want to be. And that's why I think that your two issues are very interconnected. That if you want the consumer to have a great experience, that really starts, if it's in a bricks and mortar store, then that really starts by having the right products at the right time at the right price. That's what retailing is fundamentally all about. And therefore, if you're going into a shop and things are missing, if there's holes in the shelving, where you wanted stuff to be and the consumer can't get the product they want, then that is not going to be a great customer experience. So I think, I don't think you can pull them apart, Daniel. I think the two are intrinsically connected. If you want a great customer experience, you've got to give them the right products at the right price in the right place at the right time.
And if y'all don't mind expanding on that over-promising aspect a little bit, how have you seen that challenge manifest for retailers? Basically, what does over-promising to the consumer look like when balancing inventory management needs, and what are your strategies for avoiding that?
Well, I think it's fairly straightforward. If we use the equivalence of on sales on e-commerce, then I click the button where I say I want that product. You're making a commitment to me to say we've got that product, and I've said to you I'm going to deliver it tomorrow, so I'm going to deliver that tomorrow. And if it doesn't arrive tomorrow, you suddenly send me an email later saying, sorry, we haven't got it now. That's really going to ruin my thoughts around you as a retailer and your reputation. And I think, in the old days, and I saw a piece of research around this not long ago, where they found that when most sales or largest proportion of sales were through bricks and mortar, retailers could get away with it more. The consumer was more forgiving in that environment because they could probably say, well, you know what, I'll come back tomorrow, or I'll walk down the high street, or, critically, it wasn't there anyway, so I didn't see it. The challenge with online is I see it, you're saying you got it, it's there. And I've actually got several options now. And there's some obviously very big players around e-commerce that will make it available the next day. So I think the expectation from the consumer is fundamentally different now than it was before. I think they are much less forgiving than they've ever been, certainly when you look at the bricks and mortar environment. And so therefore, if your promise is that we're going to have this stock available, we're almost going to, in effect, we're going to mimic the e-commerce experience physically in the stores. That puts enormous pressure on your processes and your inventory in terms of being able to deliver that in that environment. Giving the consumer so many different ways in which they can now buy this product and return it, I think puts retailers under tremendous strain. And only the good ones are going to survive this, quite frankly.
Dave or Adrian Thomas, any thoughts there to close out this section?
Yeah, I was just thinking about the sort of two different types of consumer that I can see that the retailers have to deal with, and I'm a hi-fi guy, so I'm going to use hi-fi analogies here. So you've got what I would call the digital consumer, which is all about the transaction. I'm going to go online, I'm going to do my research, I'm going to buy, and just fulfill. I don't want to touch a human being. I don't want to interact with anybody. I just want to get that product, and I know I'm going to like it. So you've got that digital buyer, and then to Adrian's point, being able to fulfill that, it will be absolutely critical, because the nature of the beast is now instant. We've got to get instant fulfillment. And then you've got another subsection of consumers, which I would call analog, and they are perhaps more interested in the sort of older school customer service aspects of retail, and they may still want to go online, place an order, but they still want to go into the store and maybe do the click and collect, or buy online, pick up in store, have a conversation with the retailer, maybe even look at the product before they confirm and whatever it might be. So I think in equal states, the accurate inventory issue is important, whether you're a digital buyer or an analog buyer, but the impact on the consumer is different.
All right, and I think on that note, we're going to go ahead and jump over to our last segment for the roundtable. We're going to be playing another little game here to wrap up our conversation, and this one we are going to play with over, under, and we're going to be calling it Challenges to Inventory Management. So basically, with this last segment, what we're doing is exploring some more specific pressures that are creating challenges in inventory management, and getting a better sense from all three of you, the experts, on what's going to have a bigger impact and why. So we're going to do this with a game of over, under. The way this will work is I'll pose a market pressure that is shaping inventory management needs. You'll each then hold up your answer, over or under, and for more specific context, it'll be over prioritized or under prioritized, really reflecting how challenging you think said market pressure is going to be for inventory management, and whether retailers are focusing on it to the right amount. Is this a pressure we should be worrying about, or is it something that we can more or less shrug off through 2021? So, with that in mind, get those sheets of paper ready, one side over, one side under, and we are going to jump right in. So, we are going to start with visible stock availability. This one's pretty straightforward and plays right into what we've been discussing the whole time, but do you think visible stock availability is an over-prioritized pressure to be placing focus on, or an under-prioritized pressure from retailers? Let's see those answers. 3, 2, 1, boom. Under all around. I love when we get some consensus. All right, team. So why do you see this as an under-prioritized issue today? Do you really see en masse most retailers still not putting enough emphasis on their visible stock availability? Break down what you're seeing.
Well, I think certainly the progressive retailers are well up there in terms of prioritizing inventory accuracy. There are still quite a number of retailers, and that still are not prioritizing this as much as they should do. They're still very much focused on the in-store, transactions, not focusing on the online, which you would think would not be the case today, but there is still a large component of retailers that are operating under that premise, Daniel.
Any other thoughts on that one from the two Adrians?
I think it comes back to that very first question we talked about, the multiple channels, and if you do not have inventory visibility across all of your channels, you will have failures. You will have You'll either have lost sales, unhappy customers, or stock inefficiencies within your stores and within your supply chain.
All right, let's jump over to our next one. This one is going to be multi-location stock holding and order fulfillment. So basically what we were talking about with brick and mortars now having to operate under a more enterprise view of inventory management. So do we see this sort of multi-location holding of stock and multi-location order fulfillment as an over-prioritized pressure for retailers or an under-prioritized pressure? Over, under, let's see it, 3, 2, 1, boom. We've got under, under, under. Wow, I think we've got a trend going today with some of this consensus. I love it. All right, let's hear from Adrian Beck on this one since we didn't on the last one. What are your thoughts? Why do you see this multi-location stock holding and fulfillment being a pressure that doesn't have quite enough attention from retailers today?
Well, I think we've touched upon some of the points already, Daniel. But I think the one that strikes me a little bit is thinking about this issue of returns, and we want to give the consumer as much choice as they want in terms of where they return this product. You can send it back to the fulfillment center, send it back to a distribution center. Send it back to a store, bring it back to a store, do whatever you like. And I think the challenge with that is you end up with all this stock that's ended up in places where it never started out. And I remember, a great case in the US, I think it was, I won't mention names, but it's one of the largest retailers in the world, where, they were getting very large items of furniture coming back to their convenience stores, because they said you can return this stuff wherever you like. And these poor little stores were inheriting all this stock that they would never sold in the first place and have no idea what to do with it and how to get it back to the distribution center. So, I think understanding how you begin to manage all of this growing complexity around fulfillment and returns is a big issue for retailers to get their head around, and what the cost of all that is. We think e-commerce makes retailers lots and lots of money, but actually what it does do is add lots and lots of complication and lots of process, which doesn't come free.
Yeah, just building on that, I think it's a topic that is widely spoken about. Most retailers are speaking about this very thing, but when you actually physically go into stores, you are not really seeing that translated into the store format or the processes within the store. So, and that's specifically the reason why I say under in terms of this particular topic. Very much spoken about, very little actually translating to the physical store and how that's formatted to incorporate all of this.
All right, next market pressure that I'm going to toss y'all's way is staffing challenges. Now, this is both low staff numbers as well as increased labor costs. So just sort of staffing challenges in general. Do you see that as an overrated pressure on retailers for managing their inventory, or an underrated pressure, an under-prioritized pressure? Let's see it. Over, under, 1, 2, 3. Boom. Let's see those answers. Ooh, Adrian's playing the middle there. I love it. Okay, I love we did not get consensus on that one, so I want to hear from everyone on this one. Let's start with Adrian Thomas. Adrian, this way. There we go. You said overrated. Let's hear why.
I think retailers have been looking at labor issues in their stores for years. It's one of their biggest operating costs. it's still a big issue as to what you do with the labor. That hasn't changed, but I don't know that it's from a sort of prioritization now. It's the number, it's on the top, list of things that people should be looking at, because they've been looking at it for years. And we know labor numbers in store have been going down and down and down. I think they are going to have to look at where that intersects with some of the different processes that we've talked about. But I don't know that it's one of the major challenges that retailers could really affect change in. That some of the others that we've talked about today, that if they focus on those first, will have a more significant change.
And then Dave, you said underrated, underprioritized challenge here. Why do you see it that way?
Well, building on what Adrian just said, for years we've been seeing retailers rationalizing and reducing staffing. I think there's now this realization that omnichannel or supporting omnichannel transactions requires actually additional manpower, and therefore where do they need to be placed, and how do we start ratcheting up again to support the omnichannel transaction? So I feel it's an under-prioritized thing at the moment, where they're not placing as much focus on that as they should do, saying that they've got these capabilities from an omnichannel point of view, but not the staffing to support it.
And then Adrian Beck, playing both sides here. Let's get your thoughts. Why the gray area?
Well, I'm not sure under or over is the right way to think about this question, if I'm perfectly honest, Danny. I think retail is acutely aware that labour cost is an issue to them. It's been an issue for them for a long time. I mean, you look at the primary drive for self-checkout, it hasn't been about giving consumers choice, it's about reducing labour costs. And so, they've been very aware that labour costs are a big issue, and in some countries it's a major issue as minimum wage is continuing to increase and so on. So I don't think it's a question of being under or over. I think they're acutely aware of it, and that's why we're seeing, I think, a ton of investment in technologies to try and mitigate against some of the challenges that reducing staffing levels generate in retail environments. As David said, you cut staff, there's going to be a cost. And how do you try and manage that impact? And so I think they're very aware of it, but I don't think it's necessarily an under or over issue. I just think it's a pinch point for retail generally.
All right, last one that I want to toss y'all's way before we wrap our broadcast today. But this market pressure is unknown loss at self-checkout. We touched on this one a little bit. When you introduce self-checkout, it introduces a lot of almost untrackable loss. So I'm curious how much pressure, how much weight you think that holds. So again, is this an over-prioritized issue for retailers and managing their broader inventory needs, or is it an under-prioritized? Over-prioritized, under-prioritized. What do we see? 3, 2, 1, boom. Under, and I'm seeing under and over from Adrian. I think we're playing both sides. All right, I love it. Got to mix it up a little bit. So let's start with Adrian Thomas. You're playing both sides a little bit there. Break down that gray area for us.
Well, again, when we talked about self-checkout earlier, I mean, that's been around for a long time.
Right.
And to Adrian's earlier comments around, the loss that occurs at self-checkout, retailers have known about it. They've sort of accepted it. And I think that they're seeing the value, the consumer value that is placed on the sort of customer satisfaction the self-checkout brings. So I'm for those retailers that are going to be new to self-checkout, it absolutely is something they should be focusing on because they're going to have challenges around it. But for those retailers that have been used to self-checkout, I don't know that it's in their top list of priorities when other inventory challenges will be more prevalent.
All right, Adrian Beck, you said under-prioritized. Give us your thoughts there.
Well, I'm just starting on a big project on this, actually, in terms of trying to measure and evaluate the impact of trying to control unknown losses. And I think what we're finding increasingly is that the level of loss wasn't known. I don't agree with Adrian on this. I think it was a black hole where you were able to explain away the losses on other things. And I think I've just seen some recent data, for instance, from one retailer where they did full audits of people using scan and go technology, where the consumer gets a scan device from the consumer, and they did a check on their baskets randomly, and they found that on average the loss was 5% of the item value in their baskets. And so, when you think that the average retail profitability in grocery is 4.99, it basically means that on every basket in that retailer, they were losing money through self-checkout. And so I think once that realization begins to grow and people fully understand the price you pay for providing consumers with this, increasingly frictionless world, I think, there's going to be some stark questions and choices to be made around this technology.
And Dave, let's round it all up and hear from you to close out this segment. What are your thoughts? You also said under-prioritized issue here. Do you agree with Adrian Beck there?
Absolutely, Daniel. I think it's one of those topics that a lot of retailers are not talking about. Well, let's put it this way. I think a lot of loss prevention practitioners are talking about this, and there's obviously a discussion point around the table, but it's not outwardly spoken about. And it certainly is something that I believe will grow into the future, and something that needs to be recognized and put on the table and addressed.
And on that note, I think that does it for our roundtable today. Thank you, all three of you, for playing ball with all the games and all the topics today and sharing some really, really valuable insights on how retailers should be approaching inventory management today, both the challenges as well as strategic solutions. So thank you again to our three guests. We'll go down the line again. We've been chatting with Adrian Beck, Emeritus Professor at the University of Leicester, Adrian Thomas, President and CEO of Datascan, and David Erasmus, Director for the EMEA region at Datascan. Adrian Beck, if folks want to find out a little bit more about your total retail loss research or any of your thought leadership on the industry and this subject, how can they get in touch? How can they learn more?
Yeah, sure. If they can certainly email me, bna@le.ac.uk. I'm more than happy to answer any questions people may have. All my reports are freely available on the ECR Retail Loss website. So if you want to go to there, you'll be able to download them all for free. And so you can read more about some of the work I've been doing over the last few years.
Perfect. And then Datascan team, if folks want to find out more about Datascan's place in this broader work towards solving inventory management challenges for retail, how can they learn more? How can they get in touch with your team?
I think the best place, Daniel, David will talk about the specifics in EMEA, but I mean the best place is to go to the datascan.com website. We also have an info@datascan.com email for people who want to get in touch with us and ask some specific questions. So that, in my mind, that's the best way to start.
Perfect. Dave, anything specific for the EMEA region?
No, just this, as Adrian explained, the website, the best place to start. The team is growing out in EMEA, and we're excited to be able to support all of our clients out in the region. But website is the place to start.
Fantastic. All right, team. Thank you again for your time today. We've been chatting with Adrian Beck, Adrian Thomas, and Dave Erasmus. Pleasure chatting with all three of you, and I'm looking forward to bringing you back on again soon. And thank you to everyone watching today's live Datascan Roundtable. Again, called To Count or Not to Count, understanding the impact of inventory accuracy on retail sales and retail loss. We'll be back with some more Datascan content soon. Till then, make sure that you're subscribing to our podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and heading to our website, datascan.com. I'm your host, Daniel Litwin, the voice of B2B, and we'll catch you next time.